Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Ann Nelson, the author and lecturer in the fields of international affairs, media, and human rights. As a journalist, she covered the conflicts in El Salvador and Guatemala and won the Livingston Award for the best international reporting from the Philippines. She served as the director of the Committee to Protect Journalists and was the director of the international program at the Columbia School of Journalism, where she created the first curriculum in human rights reporting. Her books include Red Orchestra, The Berlin Underground, and The Circle of Friends Who Resisted Hitler, and Suzanne's Children, A Daring Rescue in Nazi Paris. And her latest book is Shadow Network, Media, Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right, now out in an updated paperback version. Welcome to Background Briefing, Ann Nelson.
Thanks, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us. And this last week has been quite extraordinary and tumultuous. You had Trump's indictments, Wisconsin Supreme Court election, Tennessee's expulsion of two Democratic lawmakers and an attempt to expel a third, and now the abortion pill decision, which has just come down, not unexpected, but certainly devastating for women across this country. So, in fact, one of the three lawmakers in the Tennessee State House that was supposed to be expelled, Gloria Johnson, who wasn't expelled because, as she said, because she's white. She said in the middle of all the demonstrations in the Capitol, she said, "We're going to stomp out the march of fascism." How much do you see the march of fascism stomping us out?
Well, as I wrote about in my book, Shadow Network, there has been a carefully orchestrated plan to take the levers of power in this country over a period of not years, but decades. And a lot of elements were laid in place and went unnoticed for many years, and now they're being activated. So you have, one thing that you have in Tennessee is this growing urban population, but you've had the state gerrymandered in such a way that Democratic voters have disproportionately few seats in the legislature. And then you have these laws being passed by the legislature and measures taken by the legislature, which do not coincide with the opinion of many voters who are effectively disenfranchised by these underhanded mechanics of procedure. So that's not just going on in Tennessee. It is going on in many, many states. Many of them coincide to what was the Confederate South. And our problem is that we have such a kind of cumbersome, antiquated machinery of government that the only way that these Tennessee legislators felt they could contest what was going on was through a protest. And then procedure was called into action against them, and two of them have been neutralized, and the other one is in peril, and a lot of other public servants and representatives have been marginalized. So that's where we are in many states: Florida, Texas, Tennessee, Oklahoma. The list goes on and on.
So it's no accident, and that the three lawmakers, Gloria Johnson and the two Justins, represent the three biggest cities in Tennessee: Knoxville, Nashville, and Memphis.
Absolutely. And if you look at the map of the United States, urban areas are pretty much Democratic. And rural areas are pretty much Republican. And then you've got all of these purple suburbs where a lot of the decisive votes and elections are taking place. So the strategy has been to give excessive power to rural, older, white Republican voters through maneuvers in state house and electoral college and Senate representation, which again serves to disenfranchise the growing majority of urban Democratic voters.
So, turning to your book, Ann Nelson, Shadow Network, Media, Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right, there's been a little bit of a break in the kind of shadow. Little light is being shed in that shadow world by a really good piece by these three investigative reporters at ProPublica, Joshua Kaplan, Justin Elliott, and Alex Majeski, The piece is titled Clarence Thomas and the Billionaire. And I know it comes as no surprise to you that Thomas has been feted by billionaires, even though they made a documentary. In fact, the billionaire financed this documentary where Clarence Thomas talked about how he's a humble guy from a humble background and he likes to hang out in Walmart parking lots. But the reality is he likes to fly around in private jets, take incredibly lavish vacations, and spend a lot of time at this resort that Harlan Crow, his patron, the billionaire, has in the Adirondacks. There's a painting, apparently. In fact, there's a picture of it in the article, of Harlan Crow hanging out with Clarence Thomas at his Adirondacks retreat with none other than Leonard Leo. So, and Harlan Crow turns out to be one of these Opus Dei types as well. So it's an amazing story, isn't it? But for Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, nobody in our politics is taking on the fact that these right-wing oligarchs have found an end run around the legislative and executive branches by capturing the Supreme Court.
Well, and it's not just the Supreme Court. This is part of an overarching strategy. I'm very disappointed that the various publications, including the major newspapers, do not systematically note that the Council for National Policy is the connective tissue for these operations. Thomas's wife, Ginny Thomas, is on the board of directors of CNP Action, their lobbying arm. Leo is on the board of governors, Leonard Leo. He's been part of the judicial strategy for decades, not just years. You have a lot of coordination, and I would like all of your listeners to please go to YouTube and look at CNP February 2020 remarks, Shackelford. And you've got Kelly Shackelford, who's the head of the CNP Action Board, works directly with Ginny Thomas, talking about their strategy for the judicial appointments. And he says Trump came to them and they had a discussion about how they could advise him on the Supreme Court justices to tilt the court, which they did, and how they followed up with Trump's appointments for the federal judiciary at the second and third tier. He lays it out. He has a map, and the map shows where these appointments have taken place. And of course, they include the judge in Texas that just made the ruling on the abortion pills. So I don't know how much more blatant this operation can be. The problem is that if you identify it as all of these separate little initiatives and operations, it looks like a quasi-democratic initiative. Like, all these grassroots groups have decided that the people want such and such. No, it was a highly coordinated plan that has been systematically implemented. And if the press doesn't point that out, I don't know how people are going to realize what's being done to them.
No, I watched that video of Kelly Shackelford, the CEO of the First Liberty Institute, a forum held by the Council for National Policy, which Ginny Thomas is a part of. And it's just absolutely chilling. And he was basically crowing about how successful they've been and how obedient the judges that Trump's appointed have been, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett, and how they're appointing these younger judges who'll be around for our grandkids, and how the Ninth Circuit Court, the liberal court out here in the West, they're only 2 seats away from flipping that, and they flipped a lot of the others already. So I guess what puzzles me, Anne, is in the deal that he talks about, sitting down with Trump, and they laid out their strategy, and they've largely succeeded. What is in it for Trump? I understand that maybe the deal was that he had to take on Mike Pence in order to get the evangelical vote. And, of course, Pence would want all of this stuff done. But what's in it for Trump? I mean, the guy's an absolute libertine of the worst type. So he's not religious. He doesn't care about God and separation of church and state and all this stuff. So what's your explanation for that?
Well, I laid it out blow by blow in my book, Shadow Network, in a chapter called The Art of the Deal, after Trump's famous book. And the reality was that Trump even took himself by surprise by winning the nomination through capitalizing on his television celebrity. So he defeated the other Republican candidates. The CNP was also very supportive of Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, as well as Mike Pence, and a lot of them were never Trumpers. So they were faced with the prospect of losing the election to Hillary Clinton, which they found unacceptable, or cutting a deal with Trump, who was not of their tribe in religious terms. He was a libertine, but not a libertarian. And he also had no policies of his own. But even more pertinent, he had no war chest for the election. He had no ground game. He had no canvassers or party structure. He had no strategists. And so the Council for National Policy and its fundamentalist network came to Trump and basically gave him an electoral campaign in a box. We'll give you everything. We'll give you the money, the ground game, the strategists, the canvassers. You'll give us the courts. And the way you'll give us the courts is we'll give you a list that's assembled by the Heritage Foundation, the Federalist Society, which Leonard Leo was running, the National Rifle Association, another CNP organization. Obviously, Kelly Shackelford and First Liberty were part of the conversation. They gave Trump the list. Trump drew on the list for his appointments. And, my book has a link to the little victory party they held at the White House after the first appointment, with all of these people in attendance celebrating with Trump and well on the way to tilting the court to the most conservative court, certainly in our lifetimes, and one that runs against public opinion, social policy, and actively strips Americans of civil and political rights that have been established for years.
But this is being done via dark money, through these dark money vehicles that came out following the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision. And a lot of the dark money comes from these billionaires like Harlan Crow, who hosts Clarence Thomas and Ginny Thomas on these lavish vacations, etc. I mean, without this dark money, I don't think this would be happening, right? And now you've got Leonard Leo getting $1.6 billion from one of these right-wing plutocrats. So that's the mechanism, isn't it? What we're talking about here is a combination of the right-wing plutocrats getting laissez-faire capitalism and the religious fanatics getting moral authoritarianism.
Yes, although I do want to point out that the right wing correctly points out that there's dark money on both sides. Citizens United opened the door for dark money. I think that the big difference is that the right and the fundamentalist and the fossil fuels interests have been much more expert in strategic thinking and long-term planning. There's a lot of behavior on the part of the Democrats that say, "Oh, we've got the majority of public opinion on our side. We've got the future on our side, democratic in terms of the demographics of the United States, where women, minorities, immigrants, religious minorities are growing populations." But that has caused them to be more passive and less strategic in the way they've approached these elections, especially in swing states that Americans on the coast don't pay attention to. For example, Missouri, Tennessee. What is the systematic coverage of states like that in the major media outlets? And yet they can play, as they move from purple to blood red in their voting patterns, they have a disproportionate weight within our electoral system.
But what is the link then, though, between the wish list of the plutocrats and the religious zealotry of the Opus Dei and Christian fundamentalist types like Leonard Leo and the judge that just banned the abortion pill? What's the link there? I mean, it seems to me that, again, it seems to be that you've got a compact between laissez-faire capitalism and moral authoritarianism.
Yes, and you also have a marriage of convenience. So on the religious fundamentalist front, they want to roll back social policies to even, like a 19th century level. And in fact, in this recent Texas abortion ruling, they're going back to the Comstock law of the 19th century, literally, imposing these restrictions on women's lives, which is hard for me to believe, but there it is. On the fossil fuels and plutocrats level, what they want is an elimination of social programs, an elimination of basically the entire bundle of federally tax-financed programs in the public interest. So you'll see a concerted effort against public health in the form of COVID disinformation and attacks on our doctors and our medical staffs happening all over the country. You'll see attacks on public schools, on public school teachers, school teacher unions, school boards. Some of these are nasty and involve death threats and vandalism. This is going on all over the country. It's being coordinated by Council for National Policy groups like the Leadership Institute, the Family Research Council. Well, once you eliminate or cripple these programs, you don't need the tax base to finance them. So that's where the interests converge, right? If you remove the tax base and the regulatory mechanisms like the Environmental Protection Agency, you allow these corporate interests and high net worth individuals a kind of laissez-faire environment that could be a new era of the robber barons. That's what they're aspiring to. They don't want to pay taxes, and they don't want to support anyone else in any way. So that's the concerted effort.
And they're being very successful at it. Again,
well, they are, because the other side is not playing defense, and much less playing offense. So right. They kind of have the run of the field.
Right. Well, I'm going to link to backgroundbriefing.org this YouTube video of Kelly Shackelford, the CEO of the First Liberty Institute, speaking before the Council for National Policy about the strategy that they have employed, and in order to wake up every progressive in this country to realize that how far behind in the battle they are and how they've got to step up. So any last thoughts here before we close?
Yeah, Anne? I mean, I also have been tweeting constant updates on this front. So, if people want to follow my Twitter feed, they'll find a lot of information that is both background and updates on this. And all I can say is that, in this video, Kelly Shackelford says we are changing the future, right? We are actively altering the future. And I hope people realize that there are going to be victims in this process. It will be, young trans people that are denied medical care. It will be children who are victims of rape who can't have a procedure to allow them to continue with their lives. There are going to be human victims in this process. They don't really seem to have any compassion for the people who will get hurt by this. And I just feel that it's so important that we stand up for our fellow citizens in this period where their rights are being stripped away from them.
Well, Ann Nelson, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Ian.
And again, I've been speaking with Ann Nelson, who's an author and lecturer in the fields of international affairs, media, and human rights. As a journalist, she covered the conflicts in El Salvador and Guatemala and won the Livingston Award for Best International Reporting from the Philippines. She served as the director of the Committee to Protect Journalists and was the director of the international program at the Columbia School of Journalism, where she created the first curriculum in human rights reporting. Her books include Red Orchestra, The Berlin Underground and the Circle of Friends Who Resisted Hitler, and Suzanne's Children, A Daring Rescue in Nazi Paris. And her latest book is Shadow Network, Media, Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right, now out in an updated paperback version. We're going to take a brief station break. We're back looking into the display of fascism and anti-democratic railroading of Democratic lawmakers by the Republican supermajority in the Tennessee State House, and talk with the author of the new bestseller, The Undertow: Scenes from a Slow Civil War.